The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. Super Bowl 59 is here.
Yes, sir, it is. I'm so fired up, and I'm even more excited because I was hounding you about getting that write-up out, and we finally got it on a Wednesday, which means we also got the props. And last year, you went 5-1 on your props for plus 3.45 units, and you are actually 29-13 for 15 units all time on Super Bowl props.
Yep. Yeah. And we will talk about a couple of those props that we released to clients on Wednesday later on in this podcast. But let's start with the game because this is just the second Super Bowl we've released a best bet, so side or a total. Since I started full time in 2017, we're taking Kansas City here.
Yeah. And it looks like the Chiefs are -1 consensus, but do you think the line's going to close there?
Well, I was surprised to see the Chiefs get faded on game day in the conference title. Not only because we had a best bet on the Chiefs and our best bets beat the closing line at 76% clip dating back to 2017 when I started, but it also signals that we have a big disagreement with the market at large. I think, the market is misunderstanding Kansas City is a different team in the playoffs. Obviously, if you're looking at regular season stats, a team like the Bills, plus 0.6 net yards per play, plus 0.11 more net EPA per play than the Chiefs in the regular season. But the Chiefs clearly use those 18 regular season weeks as a training ground. They don't show themselves truly until January. And it should have been no surprise, when we see them come out in that diamond personnel that they scored 2 touchdowns on against the Bills. They're using stuff that they're not putting on tape because this team knows they're going to make the playoffs and optimize everything for the playoffs.
Yeah, and another thing that changes is Mahomes rushing. He's averaging 3.8 carries per game in the regular season, but that jumps to 5.4 carries per game in the postseason.
Yeah, and that was one of those plays that they ran out of diamond personnel was that Mahomes rushing touchdown. I mean, Kansas City can afford to experiment in the regular season by giving reps to, all those young left tackles we saw this year. We saw Najee Johnson at cornerback for way longer than he should have been out there because they know they're going to make the playoffs regardless with Mahomes. Look, they step it up in the big games. Andy Reid saves part of the playbook for those impact games. Like you mentioned, Mahomes is more likely to use his legs. Mahomes is 18-3 against the spread from -2 to underdog in his career. And this Chiefs team is healthier right now than they were all regular season too. They've got Charles Omenihu back at edge rusher. They've got Jalen Watson, so it's no more Najee Johnson out there. DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown, those 4 players that I just mentioned missed a combined 46 games in the regular season. So Kansas City is a lot healthier on both sides of the ball too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Yeah, well, we also got to talk about the fact that the Chiefs are 17-3 in the postseason in the Mahomes era.
Right, it's insane. I mean, that 85% win rate translates to a power rating of plus 10.7. So 10.7 points better than an average team. And that's before you account for they were playing a more difficult strength of schedules. That 17-3 record is exclusively against playoff teams. So I think it's safe to conservatively rate Kansas City, the playoff Chiefs, as 9.5 points better than average in the postseason, which is a big power rating. You would never get there if you were just looking at the numbers this team put up in the regular season, but we know they're a different team in the playoffs.
Well, are you one of those people that believes that there's value on the playoff Chiefs and every game they're favored by, let's say, less than a field goal?
Well, I actually don't think that. So I know I've been making a strong case for the playoff Chiefs so far, but we didn't bet the Chiefs in the last 2 Super Bowls they were in. Like I mentioned earlier, this season is different because this season's Eagles are fundamentally worse than last year's 49ers or the 2022 Eagles. I mean, you look at it, the betting markets had the 2023 49ers rated as one of the best teams of the last decade. That team all year consistently was rated between 9 and 10 points better than average. It's hard to remember after we saw, San Francisco dealing with all those injuries. A season from hell for them this year. But remember last year, they were an absolute juggernaut. And then the 2020 2022 Eagles, they weren't as rated as highly in the market as those 49ers that we were talking about, but we thought the metrics had them undervalued. We actually bet the Eagles in each playoff game that year before they played the Chiefs. So we weren't going to fade them in the Super Bowl because we thought they were undervalued at the time.
Okay, so let's get into this year's Eagles. And I don't think very many people see this team as fundamentally different from that 2022 Eagles team or last year's 49ers.
I don't either, because they've done so much winning. They've done so much winning against bad teams. If you look at the quarterbacks they faced this year, I mean, you look at it, just where the betting markets had this team before those last three games that had the backup quarterbacks in there, the Eagles were rated just 5.5 points better than average. So, that's one of the best teams in the NFL, but not a historically good team that, is on the caliber as the playoff Chiefs. I mean, you just look at this playoff path that that's gotten everyone so excited about the Eagles. It's not that impressive to me, because they played Washington last week, one of the most surprising NFC championship finalists we've seen in a while, playing in their fourth consecutive road game. The Commanders applied to a 51, 109, and 2 against the spread third consecutive road game situation. That was their fourth consecutive road game. So Bob and I, we were batting that around, because obviously we've been looking to fade the Eagles this whole playoffs, because our model doesn't like them. We're batting that around. How much is that worth? We're like, I don't know. I mean, you're playing your fourth consecutive road game, it could be worth 2 to 5 points, which is why we didn't end up betting the Commanders in that situation. And also the Commanders were missing their best offensive lineman, right guard Sam Cosmi, and that's why Jalen Carter was eventually able to wreck that game.
Yeah, so clearly there was a lot of things not helping out the Commanders there, but what happened in the Eagles' other playoff games?
You look at the other ones, it's like, okay, the Eagles beat the Rams, a dome team, in the snow. That's a huge edge. We've talked about on this podcast how much of an extra home field teams like Chicago and Green Bay have against warm weather teams late in the year. This certainly applies to something like that. And the Rams were actually able to cover the closing number of +7 despite those unfavorable conditions. And then we thought the Packers were overrated, as evident. We best bet the Vikings in week 17. Jordan Love was playing through an elbow injury that he suffered in week 18 in that wild card game against the Eagles. So I'm not bumping up the Eagles too much based off what they've done in the playoffs, right? It's not that impressive to me. Market had them 5.5 points better than average before those backup quarterback games at the end of the year. And maybe we bumped to the 6.5 point average, 6.5 points better. I mean, that's me being generous. I don't think it deserves a 1 point bump for these wins. So I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, Chiefs, 9.5. That seems pretty clear to me. We have a huge sample of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in the playoffs, and we got the Eagles. I'm trying to get them up there. I'm saying, you're 6.5 points better than average. I can't get to a true price for this game below Chiefs -2.5, -120. So, if you're going to give me Chiefs -1, I'm taking that as a best bet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into the matchups on both sides of the ball, starting with Kansas City's offense versus the Eagles' defense.
Okay, yeah, so I mentioned earlier we're going to talk about how the Chiefs' offense is better now than what they were in the regular season. They're averaging 0.15 more EPA per dropback with Hollywood Brown on the field. 3 of Patrick Mahomes' 4 highest DVO games this season have come in his 4 starts with Hollywood. And then, you look at guys like Travis Kelce. He's clearly not at the point in his career where he can give full effort every regular season game, but he adds another gear in the postseason. Kelce averaging 69 yards in the regular season throughout his career, 85 yards per game in the playoffs.
That's actually such a crazy stat. But looking at their tackles, so their natural left tackles, Wanya Morris, Kingsley Sumatai, and DJ Humphries combined to surrender a 10% pressure rate in the regular season. So the Chiefs scrapped them. And now they've improved that by taking starting left guard Joe Thuney and playing him at left tackle.
Yes. And so the Kansas City's offensive line ranks 9th in pass blocking efficiency in the 5 weeks Joe Thuney has been playing at left tackle. And then you look at those 5 games, Buffalo, Houston twice, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. That makes it even more impressive. You're moving Thuney out to tackle because those teams account for a quarter of the top 20 edge rushers in pass rushing efficiency this season. Now, the downside to Thuney changing positions is having to start Mike Caliendo at left guard, right? You want him to be kind of a backup. But Chief center Creed Humphrey leads the NFL in pass blocking efficiency. I expect him to slide Caliendo's way to contain Milton Williams, who is 19th in pressure. So that brings us to the matchup of this side of the ball, right? You've got Jalen Carter, who had 53 pressures this year, 9th in the NFL, one-on-one versus Trey Smith, who ranked 13th in pass blocking efficiency. So Trey Smith, he's a much better than average guard, but he's not an all-pro level guard. He's going to lose reps to Jalen Carter, but I don't think Jalen Carter can wreck the game like he did against the Commanders because Trey Smith is good enough to hold up one-on-one.
All right, well, looking at Eagles cornerback Cooper DeJean, he conceded negative 28.3 EPA, second in the NFL. And then Philadelphia's defense changed when the rookie came into the lineup. The Eagles were the lone defense in the NFL to concede less than a 40% dropback success rate weeks 6 through 17 with DeJean as a starter. So how do you think the Chiefs are going to try and attack the secondary?
Well, you mentioned how great this drop back success rate was for the Eagles once they put the rookie nickelback on the field. But the Eagles ranked 15th in drop back success rate allowed versus RPO passes. Kansas City's offense had the second highest RPO rate in the NFL this year at 17%. It's jumped to 24% RPO rate in the playoffs, so I expect them to go all after the Eagles and the rookie Cooper DeJean with RPOs. The Eagles ranked second in EPA per dropback on passes with 20-plus air yards. So we know that Vic Fangio likes to put a roof over the opposing offense, and the Eagles led the NFL in EPA per dropback on throws with less than 10 air yards. This is a great rally and tackle defense. The place to attack Philadelphia's defense is between 10 and 19 air yards, where they rated 15th, and there's likely to be even more open space on those intermediate passes because Eagles starting linebacker Nakobe Dean is sidelined.
Yeah, and to add to your point, Philadelphia's defense surrendered 7.5 receptions per game to slot receivers, ninth most in the NFL, and Washington tight end Zach Ertz had 9 targets in the slot in the conference championship.
And it's like, okay, well, the Chiefs have a better version of Zach Ertz in Travis Kelce. He's very comfortable going out of the slot. He led the Chiefs with 295 routes from the slot this year. Kelce finished this year, even though he wasn't giving full effort in the regular season, he still finished with the 6th best success rate among tight ends, and I expect Mahomes to feature him heavily on RPOs in that intermediate range behind Eagles backup linebacker Oren Burks.
All right, well, let's shift it over to Philadelphia's offense versus Kansas City's defense. And Jalen Hurts averaged 7.8 yards per pass play in Super Bowl 57 against the Chiefs. And defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo was able to make adjustments and limit Hurts to 4.8 yards per pass play in Week 11 of last season.
I mean, Spagnuolo, he's got the league's most unpredictable pressure package. Kansas City's defense led the NFL with 24% unblocked pressure rate on blitzes this year. And he's going to turn up the heat this week, in my eyes, because Jalen Hurts has a league-high 13% sack rate when blitzed. This has been a problem for Jalen Hurts his whole career. Yep. That's why they hired Kellen Moore in the offseason to solve the problems against the blitz. Moore improved it, but it's still clearly a weakness. A league-high 13% sack rate when blitz is terrible. Philadelphia's offense is averaging only 1.1 yards per pass play versus unblocked pressures. That's 29th in the league. We know the Chiefs are going to create some of those because you never know where Spags is going to send the blitz from. That's why they won the game against the Bills with that big corner blitz. The Chiefs ranked 6th in success rate, and I kind of feel like they have a favorable injury situation up front as well this week.
Yes, they definitely do, because left guard Landon Dickerson is dealing with a possible ACL or meniscus injury. And then to add on top of that, center Cam Jurgens, his back kept him out of the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, I mean, those guys clearly hobbled. They're not going to be 100%. And you don't want to hear that when you're going against Chris Jones, who ranked 2nd in pass rushing efficiency.
No, you do not. And you actually mentioned earlier how the Chiefs didn't have Jalen Watson for most of the season. So how much is he going to make a difference now that he's back?
Well, I did go back and isolate the games with and without Watson. The Chiefs have been 0.06 EPA per play better in Watson's 8 starts compared to the 11 weeks he missed. So that's about a point or 2 per game. But then when you go in and dig deeper and look at who they played in those games that he was on and off the field, in the 8 games he was on the field, they played only one offense ranked outside of the top 20 in the NFL in yards per play. So basically all at least mediocre, some elite offenses when he was on the field. 8 of the 11 games he missed were against offenses ranked outside the top 20 in yards per play. So it was all the games he missed were against the bad offenses. So when you look at that 0.06 EPA per play better, it looks like 1 to 2 points per game initially, but then when you compensate it for the quarterbacks they were playing, they're probably 4 points per game better with Watson on the field. And that might say more about how bad Najee Johnson was, but it's clearly going to make a huge difference in containing Philadelphia's wide receivers, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith.
Okay, so what approach do you think Spags is going to go with to take away Philly's wide receivers?
All right, well, I've given this a lot of thought, and I've listened around and read around, and people have different takes on this. So I'm not super confident, but this is what I would do if I were Spags. I would put Trent McDuffie lined up across from Devonta Smith and then use Jalen Watson with help over the top on A.J. Brown, because Watson is 3 inches taller than McDuffie, and McDuffie struggled with big physical receivers in the past. Now, McDuffie did hold up against Nico Collins in the divisional round. Collins only had 1.6 yards per route run against McDuffie, but I think now that, Watson, it's not Watson's first game back like it was against the Texans, I think you can be a little bit more comfortable putting him on A.J. Brown. Plus, the Texans didn't have a great number 2 option with Tank Dell down, so you're like, okay, we just put Trent McDuffie on the number 1 guy here. This time it's a little bit more dicey because the Eagles have 2 great receivers, and I think McDuffie is going to be comfortable going inside in the slot with Devonta Smith because he took 117 snaps at nickelback this season, conceding only 0.9 yards per cover snap.
Okay, well, Kansas City's defense allowed a 52% success rate to opposing wide receivers, but that weakness has been improved, as you said, with Watson's return, as Watson is conceding 0.33 yards per cover snap fewer than backups Najee Johnson and Joshua Williams. And then to add on to that, the Chiefs allowed only a 38% success rate to opposing running backs, 4th in the NFL, but that does make tight ends the place to target in this version of Kansas City's defense.
It does. And Dallas Goedert has a 29% target per route run rate since returning from that knee injury in the final week of the season. Goedert is averaging 51 receiving yards per game in the 6 weeks he was healthy with Hurts, Brown, and Smith on the field. Now, the betting markets have adjusted to Goddard's expected uptick in usage, setting his receiving yards prop at 52.5. So I do think Goedert is the guy that the Eagles are going to go to against this Chiefs too high defense. The Chiefs run the second most too high safety rate in the NFL. They'll want to do that to help over the top against A.J. Brown, like I talked about. And the Eagles yards per pass play versus too high is just 87% of their yards per pass play against single high. That's 29th relatively in the league.
All right, well, we got to talk about the ground game. And Eagles running back Saquon Barkley is averaging 6.7 yards per rush in the postseason. But the big question here, can the Chiefs shut him down?
I don't know about shut him down, but I think he'll be significantly worse in this game than he has been in the playoffs so far against the Commanders, Rams, and Packers. So Barkley led the NFL averaging 2.55 yards before contact per rush. That means he had great blocking all year. And the Commanders defense ranked 27th in EPA per rush allowed and surrendered a league high yards before contact per running back run. Basically, the Commanders and Dan Quinn invites you to run with lighter personnel. He was doing that in Dallas too, and they were not well suited to stop Saquon Barkley. The Rams also encourage opponents to run, ranking 28th in average yards before contact allowed to opposing running backs. So 2 great matchups for Saquon right there. And then Green Bay's defense had a propensity to allow huge plays as well. The Packers surrendered a run of at least +1 expected point added at a 15% rate this year. That's 31st in the league. Then you look at Kansas City. The Chiefs had the second fewest missed tackles in the NFL and conceded just 3.8 yards per carry to opposing running backs, second in the league. I think Barkley is going to be limited to 5 yards per rush, or maybe less than that. And he's unlikely to break those explosive runs we've seen him have in the playoffs so far because the Chiefs allowed carries of 10 plus yards on just 11% of opponent runs this season. That's 7th in the league. So, you look at it all, Chiefs offense versus the Eagles defense, Chiefs defense versus the Eagles offense, just where the power ratings are for these teams. Matchup wise, it's seeming mostly neutral to me, maybe a slight tick to Kansas City, depending on how injured the Eagles' interior offensive line is.
Mhm.
But from a power rating perspective, Kansas City has to be a best bet here.
Yes. So, Tan, let's get into the props. And you can actually get all of our props at drbobsports.com. But we're going to go over a few here. And let's actually shift it back to Saquon Barkley.
Yes, we're going to start with Saquon Barkley, longest rush under 24.5 yards. Now, that's what I'm seeing as kind of the median market price here, but some have 25.5, some have 23.5, so you're going to want to shop around. Barkley had 9 games this season with his longest rush above 25.5 yards, 9 games this season with his longest rush below 23.5 yards, and 1 game where it was 25 yards. So you look at it, this prop is basically priced correctly if you think the Chiefs are an average defense that the Eagles have faced this season, but that's obviously not true. Philadelphia's opponents only had a 0.453 win percentage this season. That's the 3rd easiest in the NFL, and the Eagles faced the easiest schedule of opposing defenses, nearly a point easier than average, according to our numbers.
Yeah, and Philly's offense averaged a league low 10 minutes and 4 seconds time of possession per game, trailing due to that strength of schedule.
Yeah, so the Eagles are going to be passing more on Sunday. And the market has adjusted for this in Jalen Hurts passing attempts props. But the the next derivative of that is that Barkley is going to have fewer attempts to break a long rush here. And when you're talking about a long rush over 20 yards, that's typically going to require missed tackles. We mentioned the Chiefs had the 2nd fewest missed tackles in the NFL, and Kansas City's defense allowed a run of more than 20 yards on just 1.9% of opponents' carries this season. That's 7th best in the league. So when you look at it, the Chiefs have a good run defense, and even better preventing explosive run defense, and Saquon wouldn't have even gone over this prop. This prop is basically priced as median for the whole year against the trash defenses that he was going against.
Okay, well, let's shift it over to our next prop, and it's actually on the Chiefs side. So what do you got for us?
Okay, we're going to take Xavier Worthy under 57.5 receiving yards. This is actually a little bit of a hedge against our Chiefs' best bet, but I think that it provides pretty good value here. So you look at, Worthy's role has increased massively as Kansas City's coaching staff has begun to trust him down the stretch here. Worthy had no games with an 80% snap share before his last 6 starts. All of those 6 starts had better than an 80% snap share. Now, this increased role is priced into this prop. Worthy is averaging 60 receiving yards in his last 6 games, and he's 3-3 versus this prop price. So it's priced correctly for his current role against an average scheme. But I think the way the Eagles play defense, they're going to be able to shut down Worthy, because Worthy's most yards of the season last week came against the Bills, because the Bills had a 47% man coverage rate, which the Eagles are not going to do.
Yeah, and Worthy has been, as you just said, much better versus man coverage, averaging 1.83 yards per route run compared to just 1.27 yards per route run against zone.
And his target percentage drops from 25% of his snaps versus man to just 17% of his snaps against zone coverage. I mean, Mahomes has veteran receivers like Travis Kelce and DeAndre Hopkins who have a better feel against zone coverage than the rookie wide receiver. Now, Philadelphia's defense had a 76% zone coverage rate. I'd expect that to increase on Sunday after we saw Mahomes have a season-high 65% dropback success rate versus the Bills last week trying to force man coverage. That Worthy has been the target on 58% of Kansas City's screens in these last 4 games, but I don't believe this is going to be a screen-heavy game plan, as the Eagles led the NFL in EPA per dropback on throws with less than 10 air yards.
Yeah, I mean, only 6.6% of passing yards against Philly's defense came from screens this season.
Yeah, and that was 4th in the league. So they really rally and tackle against screens. And I don't think the Chiefs are going to force the ball to Worthy on those screens. Worthy's going to get most of his snaps across from fellow rookies Quinyon Mitchell and nickelback Cooper DeJean. Mitchell has 2 interceptions and conceded only 24 yards on 15 targets in the postseason. He's having an incredible postseason. I think the Chiefs are going to avoid him. And then DeJean was 4th in yards per coverage snap allowed in the slot. So 2 pretty solid guys to put on Worthy. He's going to get less screen targets. He's going to get less targets against man coverage, because I don't expect the Eagles to play a bunch of man. Give me Xavier Worthy under 57.5 receiving yards.
I love that pick, Tan. Well, if you're looking for more content, make sure to head over to drbobsports.com where you can sign up for our college basketball service. And the next time you'll see us, we will be doing our annual March Madness preview.
You know what, Grant? I'm going to toss out a future for the people to root for during that podcast break. So give me Baylor 25-1 to make the Final Four.
Let's go. I love that. We need a little action here.
We do. And they're underrated because Jeremy Roach missed 4 games. Langston Love missed 14 games. And then VJ Edgecombe is expected to be back on the court this Saturday as well. This team's got a lot of DNA I want to target for a late March run. First of all, they're top 15 team by analytical priors going into the season, indicating that they have a super high ceiling and they just underperformed that talent this year. But that's kind of explainable because they're starting 2 true freshmen and 2 transfers.
Yeah, it makes sense that their best ball is yet to come as they get more reps with each other. But I know the 2 things that you're always preaching in March are offensive rebounding and not relying on free throws. So where does Baylor rank in those categories?
Well, Baylor is 14th in offensive rebounding rate after compensating for strength of schedule, according to our metrics. And the Bears rank 285th in the nation in terms of the percentage of points coming from the free throw line. And I don't like teams to rely on the free throw line in March because you can't rely on the refs making the same calls in the postseason that they do in the regular season when they kind of let the players play a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy you could ask about that. His name is James Harden in the NBA.
Yes, exactly. Harden, his playoff runs have always been stopped through the years because he doesn't get the same calls. And we see the same thing in college basketball. And Baylor, just from a shot quality perspective, they rank 4th in the country. So I think, this is shaping up to be a top 10 power rated team with everyone healthy. They're going to be a 7 to 10 seed. So, it's not going to be crazy odds here, but even if you're a top 10 team at a 7 to 10 seed, I think you've got somewhere between a 5 and 6% chance to make the Final Four.
Okay, well, thanks for that little treat, Tan, and make sure that you are subscribing so you don't miss the release of our March Madness episode, and we will see you all in a few weeks.